Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Turin here, and today, guys, I'm here with another Total War Warhammer online commentary. In this particular battle, I'm going to be playing the Empire, and I'm going to be facing off against Bretonnia, so definitely a cockfight between two of the higher tier factions, and let's get right into the builds. So for the front line, I have mostly swordsmen. Now, I like swordsmen not because they're the most elite infantry per se, but they have pretty good combat stats. I'm looking at SIGMAR Suns right now, but standard swordsmen actually have 32 melee defense and 32 melee attack, which isn't bad for how cheap they are. And on top of that, if it does come down to it, kiting atrocious warfare, they do have shields as well, which is not a bad choice against Bretonnia, who tends to field at least a few groups of peasant bowmen. So that's pretty much my whole front line. It's just swordsmen right here, and then of course I do have the SIGMAR Suns, who are unbreakable and have excellent stats with 43 melee attack and 43 melee defense as well. So a very, very good unit. Aside from that, I do have the Silver Bullets. I actually have two groups of Free Company Militia, who I like quite a bit. They have good, front line stats. They have 28 melee attack, 25 melee defense, but they also have some decent missile play. So again, kind of a hybrid close quarters infantry unit, as the title infers. I like them quite a bit, and there are some decent slopes on this map, so they actually worked out pretty well. When you have like a situation where you have like little slopes like this, it's very, very optimal to put like your handgunners, Silver Bullets, all those kind of units there, and you can actually shoot like over your front line, which is quite nice. But anyways, two groups of Free Company Militia. I do have the Boris Todbringer. I also have a Jade Wizard, which is pretty much a staple in competitive play, in my opinion. Aside from that, I have three groups of Spears in the back line to just defend against Cav or any funny business that my opponent has going on. And I do also have the Hammer of the Witches. So the Hammer of the Witches is pretty good. Obviously, it can do some devastating damage to Bretonnian Cav, to Pegasus Knights, all that kind of stuff. But against infantry, it's a little bit subpar. I would say it's going to do well, but at the end of the day, it's not going to, really equivocate to the additional costs that you pay on top of that. So that's pretty much it for my army. I do also have two groups of Demogryph Knights who are pretty elite. Demogryph Knights do great against pretty much all Bretonnian Cav. The one thing about Bretonnia is if they do have the Royal Pegasus Knights, who do have the anti-large, they're always going to get the charge on the Demogryph Knights, so that's one thing you have to watch out for, but for the most part, Demogryph Knights are pretty excellent. So for my opponent's army over here, he actually has two mounted yeomen, and I really like this. You don't see them terribly often, and they do have Vanguard deployment. I actually didn't have any sight on them right now, so my opponent is most definitely going to be able to come up and through the forest and get some really good flanking play. So aside from that, he has a pretty heavy infantry core, and one of the more competitive compositions, I would say. He has Foot Squires mixed in with Battle Pilgrims. I really like kind of that mix and match. So if I did by chance bring Greatswords or something, kind of thinking to counter his Foot Squires, the Battle Pilgrims wouldn't do so well. However, the Foot Squires would. So in the front line, he does have all Foot Squires and Battle Pilgrims, it looks like. In the wings, he does have a group of Spearmen at Arms with shields. He has the second group over here to obviously defend against Cav and that kind of thing. Somewhat similar to what I'm doing with my Spears on my side. He does also have a Grail Reliquae, several groups of Peasant Bowmen with the Pox Arrows, which is very good. Because the Empire traditionally has very lightly armored frontliners like Spearmen and Swordsmen, and all those guys only have 30 armor. So the lack of armor piercing on these Peasant Bowmen isn't really going to be a big deal. Although he does have Fire Arrows. Now, if any of you guys know, I'm not 100% sure, but does Fire have some sort of a leadership effect on units, or is it just kind of conditional against like Cryptors and units with regeneration and all that kind of stuff? You guys have to let me know. Again, I'll probably look it up after this game. But he does have some poison arrows over here, which is pretty nice. Some spears in the back. And he actually has a pretty heavy heroic presence. On top of having some Knights of the Realm here, he also does have the Fey Enchantress and 3 Paladins. So a bit of a change up from what I'm used to. A lot of people don't bring Paladins, but they can be pretty good. And aside from that, let's get right down to the fun. So right now he's getting these mounted yeomen and getting ready to kind of probably sneak him up through the forest like I previously mentioned. And we're both just kind of advancing in the main valley here. You can see the Hammer of the Witches coming in here, making some decent contact against the Foot Squires, but unlike like a Grudge Thrower or any type of catapult type unit, it's not going to be as good against infantry. Generally it'll just kind of come in and clip a few of them, whereas like a Grudge Thrower will make a very like solid impact in the middle of a group. But when the units are spread wide like this, they're not going to take as much damage from siege pieces. However, they'll be more susceptible to getting penetrated and rode over by Cav. So in the front line right now, I'm just pulling up my Free Company Militia. I'm going to have him come up and do a little bit of skirmishing fire before my opponent gets in, which will be pretty nice. And you can see up on the top, he's coming over with his Knights of the Realm, and he is sitting his Paladins and his Fey Enchantress over here, probably so they don't take any missile fire from the Hammer of the Witches. So right now, I switch on my Hammer of the Witches to shoot at this Grail Reliquae. Definitely something you want to get rid of, because in a very close, long game, that thing can keep those Bretonnian Foot Squires and Battle Pilgrims from rotting. So over here, you can see these guys are taking some fire from the Free Company Militia, these units are, becoming more meta. I've been seeing them a lot in a lot of different builds, and they seem to be pretty good in terms of utility against like vampires, because they can obviously fend off zombies, and just a very cool unit. They haven't been used a lot, but I think people are starting to kind of figure out how to use them. So over here, these Free Company Militia are taking some shots in here. They didn't kill any models per se on these Battle Pilgrims, but they're still doing some decent harass damage, doing some HP damage. You can see they've taken about 7 to 8% of their HP and damage. And also you can see that my units back here, the handgunners, have a decent little slope of fire right here, as these guys are kind of on elevated ground over here. So I also do have the silver bullets, so as you guys can see, whenever you're using powder units, it's always optimal to put them on a high ground position where they can get an easy slope of fire. But you can see my opponent over here retaliating with some of his pox arrows and fire arrows, doing some pretty good damage to my handgunners who only have 20 armor. So that was a pretty dicey little situation over there. And over in the forest, guys, this is definitely scary. He does have 2 groups of mounted yeomen, and I definitely was not aware of those, completely ignorant to that, and that was a tough situation. So what I do over here is I move my free company militia, and I put them in this like little pocket right here so they can continue to shoot in right there. But you can see that the mounted yeomen are coming out. So unfortunately, I actually pulled these handgunners back to get them a better slope on the higher ground right as he was pushing in, so I completely exposed them. I do get some spearmen in here to help out, but unfortunately these mounted yeomen are going to have a field day against these lightly armored units, and they're just getting in there, going balls deep. They're little rakes. Their weapons are so haggard, but the mounted yeomen still are going to do some pretty massive damage against these handgunners who are obviously not meant for melee at all. Free company militia would have held their ground a little bit better, but for the most part, these guys are going to, do some serious work. So I do pull some spears in on the flank who have kind of pinned these guys in. They're going to cut these mounted yeomen to pieces, and I also do pull an additional group of spears, and some of my Demogryph Knights are coming over the hill and are going to push in with their anti-large bonus, are just going to annihilate these mounted yeomen. So you can see, they took a lot of damage, but he was able to get a good charge, essentially devastate one of my groups of handgunners, and also disable my Hammer of the Witches for a good, 30 to 45 seconds. So very, very well played there. You can see my silver bullets are actually just shooting them point blank, but what I end up doing is just using these Demogryph Knights just to kind of push these guys off and make sure that they don't come back. Because harass units like this, if he was able to split them into 2 groups, like send one over here and send one over here, that would be tough because I don't want to allocate 2 groups of Demogryph Knights since I know he has some Knights of the Realm and other cav waiting over here. So that would have been very tricky if he was able to split those guys up and, push in from 2 different angles. But in the front fight, we have a very kind of pitched cockfight over here. You can see the swordsman and SIGMAR Sons just going tooth and nail. This guy's throwing a mean karate kick right to the face of that guy. It's like an Anderson Silva straight kick on that guy. You can also see the Jade Wizard riding in here and Boris Todbringer going after the Fey Enchantress. And as far as competitive play, I would highly recommend Boris Todbringer, just generally speaking, because regeneration and healing is just essential. Again, there's a lot of like sniping mechanics in this game. Units can take big burst damage, and you don't want to lose the whole game because of that. So if you're really trying to play it safe, the Toadbringer is definitely a safe choice. So he does pull in 3 Paladins right here. So he's keeping them on auxiliary, probably waiting to see what I was doing with the Toadbringer, and he actually starts focusing my Jade Wizard here, and I was not paying attention to this. So very, very well played by my opponent. You can see the Fey Enchantress also taking some pretty massive damage from the Toadbringer. So a lot of my swordsmen are just kind of fighting tooth and nail and actually not doing terribly against these Foot Squires. Foot Squires did get their leadership nerfed. Granted, the rest of their stats are very strong, and they still do have heavy armor piercing with anti-infantry bonus. So against swordsmen, they are most certainly going to get their infantry bonus. But other than that, their melee defense is only 20, so they're going to be taking a lot of contact, whereas SIGMAR Sons actually have 43 melee defense, so not a bad situation there. So some of his mounted yeomen do come back and they charge into the front line. Again, they're going to be stifled a little bit in terms of their charge, but they are going to help overwhelm this group of swordsmen over here. So on the far side, I do have my free company militia who are taking some pot shots. They are slightly obstructed, but still they're able to kind of hit the tips of these Foot Squires, and you can see these Foot Squires are taking some pretty substantial HP damage, which is nice. Definitely helping these swordsmen out a little bit. And if these swordsmen break, these Foot Squires are going to do a pretty good job of kind of keeping, these free company militia will do a good job of keeping them in check. So in the back line, it's a little bit of chaos and anarchy, but I do get my Hammer of the Witches online. I now have my spears kind of waiting here just in case there's any other funny business. I have my other group of spears over here, and you can see these silver bullets are doing a great job just gunning down these guys. So that's one of the things in this matchup. I find that Bretonnia often wins the front line, but what happens is the Empire then splits up their forces in the back. So as you can see on kind of an overhead perspective, I have my free company militia over here. I have my silver bullets here. I also have my other free company militia here and some handgunners here. So as he wins that front line, he's going to have to like come in and concave. So let me see if I can actually turn on the drawing thing, but I guess I'll just do that in another video. But for the most part, he could come in here and like push and be really aggressive, but he's going to be taking handgunner fire that whole time, and it's going to be absolutely wild. So over here, the Toadbringer is doing a pretty good job of helping win this front line. And, a lot of people are like, oh, swordsmen are never going to hold up against a Bretonnian front line. But with the Jade Wizard and Perpetual Earthbloods and things like that, they usually do pretty well. So I had this group of Demogryph Knights who were able to chase off those mounted yeomen. So I've just kind of pulled them into the front. And I figured, hey, they have enough armor piercing. They're going to do pretty well against infantry and against paladins. So I get them in here. And these Demogryph Knights are really helping to turn the tide, especially when they're backed up by SIGMAR Sons, who are excellent combatants themselves. So you can see he does have several paladins here. He has the Fey Enchantress with that Mortis Engine effect, kind of draining my guys, I would imagine. And in the back, you can see that these peasants are actually taking some handgunner fire from some of my missiles up here on the slopes, which is quite nice. Over here, he is sending his paladins in and the Fey Enchantress to try and kind of push off the Toadbringer. You can see he's going in pretty hot. But the Toad is, he's pretty resilient. As far as his healing cap goes, he probably has quite a bit. So he has another 1,500 HP he can still heal with, which is really, really nice. So over here in the back, my Demogryph Knights, I was able to intercept those Knights of the Realm, so he came around and tried to get a little bit of a flank, but just a huge beating. I mean, the Knights of the Realm do have an anti-large bonus, but they do not have the same kind of armor piercing that Demogryph Knights have, so that's just going to be a horrible mismatch. And you can see these Demis who are coming in right now, and the backline is relatively open for the most part, but I decided to kind of collapse them on the flank here and just help out with these Paladins, because I did see that the Toadbringer was taking quite a bit of damage. So I, go after these Paladins, and I was like, hey, maybe I can get the Fey Enchantress here as well. However, in retrospect, I think it would have been pretty nice to kind of push around and just punish this backline, because he still has these peasant bowmen who are, fighting tooth and nail for the most part. So over here, you can see there's some battle pilgrims just kind of waving their weapons. They definitely should be up here helping their brethren, but my swordsmen over here on the flank are still holding up. And you can see on the backside, some spearmen at arms with shields did get into some of these foot squires, or excuse me, these free company militia. But oh man, these guys are cool. And I wonder if they actually, do they ever shoot when they're in like melee and just kind of cap guys in the faces? But regardless, they got their cool sun hats on, they got their feathers, they're doing pretty well. And let's see just kind of a stat comparison. So these guys have 20 melee attack and 38 melee defense. So these guys, this might actually be a somewhat even trade in just a pure melee fight, though the melee defense is very high on these guys. I think the leadership is better on these as well. So granted, they're only at 22 right now because they've, taken some damage and are being flanked, but a bit of an interesting look there. So for the front line, the Bretonnian forces have routed a lot of my swordsmen, so I've lost quite a bit, but I do have this very scary firing line over here. You can see I have the silver bullets who are slightly obstructed right now. I do have the free company militia who are also firing, and I do have an additional group of handgunners who are pressuring my opponent's units. And also over here, the Demogryph Knights, I didn't want to keep them in sustained combat as he did have some spears in there. So I pulled them up and around. You can see they're kind of pushing through some of these units, and they're definitely going to be very helpful collapsing on these paladins. So they get in the back here and they kind of sandwich these paladins down, and a lot of his heroic units are going to start taking quite a bit of work right now. And it actually looks like I decided to run them around, but the Fey Enchantress did get caught out. She's definitely going to just get run over by these Demogryph Knights. So she's probably going to go down here in just a moment. You can see she's trying to escape. She's probably broken, but that Demogryph actually just does a little kind of a lame paw there and takes her out. So that was pretty nice. The Fey Enchantress is now down, and it looks like the rest of the Bretonnian forces do collapse from there. So definitely a good cockfight. A lot of wild stuff going on. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that one. I definitely really liked my opponent's mounted yeoman play. That was something that caught me really off guard. And I honestly think if he had split them, so if he had sent one group in there, he had looped one up and around and gone after another group of missiles, that could have been a very different battle, and I think that would have been very tough. Because thankfully he sent them all in at once and I was able to get some spears and a single group of Demogryph Knights to kind of just lock them down. So regardless, very well played to my opponent, Chainsaw Gav. I definitely like your build. It was a lot of fun, and hey, let me know if you guys want to see more Empire games, and I'll definitely do my best to play them. Thanks again for watching, guys, and have an excellent night.